Have you ever wondered how safe you really are in today's unpredictable market? Our guest today, Mark Ledlow, is here to pull back the curtain on personal physical security. So, Mark, hey, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me on. You got to love technology. You can be in the Midwest, and I can be on the West Coast enjoying the Pacific Northwest and the rivers, and you have to suffer with that humidity out in the Midwest. Yeah, doing well. Can't complain. I'm away from any big city right now that has issues.
True, and it's
Literally.
like more relevant than ever, right? This
Yeah.
conversation about security and you give us a background. You know, you're a military background Marine, and I appreciate we all appreciate the service you and your family have put towards this country in terms of giving us the freedoms that we have. But tell us a little bit of background of where you've been and where you are today and why you're there.
Where I've been, who would have guessed that during the 2008 market crash, that's a long time ago. I think I'm dating myself to your audience. But I was got out of college, got my criminology degree from Southern Oregon University. I was on the dean list, minored in psychology. I was become a badass cop, SWAT cop guy. That was the dream. Being a Marine Corps veteran, that's always the dream. And the market crashed, and I'm like, I had a great corporate job up in Oregon, doing in the Pacific Northwest, doing some fun stuff in the corporate world. And I'm like, you know what? I think maybe it might be a good time to go in the corporate security realm and maybe become a bodyguard or some crazy thing. So I moved down to Southern California, not knowing a soul, had a couple contacts, and started sending my resume on this thing called Craigslist. And that's how you got jobs back then. Indeed wasn't a thing, LinkedIn was not a thing, and neither was Facebook. Didn't exist. You had to show up, you had to interview with people, coffee, Starbucks back then. That's how we did things. Had a flip phone if you're lucky called a BlackBerry.
Yeah,
And
remember those
so,
days?
yeah, that's when I got in the executive protection industry. There was a tribal family that had needed support down there, so I got on that contract in Southern California, and that started my career literally 20 plus years ago.
Wow. Yeah. And so take us back to those, those years of like starting off, right, and getting into the military and take us some of those learned lessons and processes and really turning it into the opportunity that you looked at with Ledlow Security Group and what caused you to say, I can do this on my own. We all start these businesses, right? More of acts of service. Like we think that ultimately we want to help people ultimately, and then how do we almost like marry the business and making money part with helping people. And so tell us more about that start.
Starting the business was scary. It was right in the middle of COVID. And I sat down with a friend of mine's brother-in-law, or son-in-law that was, and he sat me down. He goes, "So now that everything's shut down, what are you going to do to get your name out there? You can't go to conferences. You can't really work because COVID is. How are you going to handle it?" I'm like, "Huh, that's a good question. I have no idea." And he goes, "Have you ever thought about podcasting?" Well, we're sitting around doing nothing. Have you ever thought about launching a podcast? I'm like, "What's that?" I never listened to Joe Rogan. I've never listened to any of these big names in podcasting. And so I'm like, huh, maybe this kid has an idea. And sure enough, I'm like, podcasting was the thing 4 years ago. And he goes, well, yeah, all these other media outlets are dying because the young people don't believe they're telling the truth. So they're going to podcasting to get their information and credible source. They just don't believe in network news anymore because they're all spinning propaganda left or the right. I'm like, huh, okay. Well, I've spent 20 years in this thing called exec protection, or 15 years back then. I'm like, maybe it might be a smart idea. So launched it, reached out to Mike Trout and said, hey, Mike, can you help me out? Launch this thing. He's a badass of badasses. He doesn't look at himself that way, but he's a very smart, one of the smartest men I know in this business. He's like a mentor to me. About 6 years ago, I worked with him on a detail in Beverly Hills, had the largest female agent roster supporting a royal family from the Middle East with Chris Coleman as well. Shout out to those guys, and had Mike Trout on the podcast. We launched it. His network started watching it, and he helped push it. And then we pushed his book, The Protected. which I'll go into more detail about that book. And my name's not in it, but I was in the book in one of his details. So that's kind of what launched the podcast. And the name came from my dad's approach of life, the fearless mindset, due to the fact that he was dealing with brain cancer, stage 4. And I totally got out of the business. I left the business for 5 years and helped him out 6 days a week, 7 days a week. Went to movies with him, took him to dinner, did road trips to the coast, trips to Portland. Just we had a blast. Took him to the river. Said, hey, he's got 4 years ago. Let's make this count. Let's create these memories that will last a lifetime, and they do. And he was fearless until his last breath before he left this earth on to whatever was behind those curtains. And because of his approach being fearless and to his last breath, I'm like, you just gotta be fearless in business too. You almost have to be like have that Michael Jordan, Tom Brady mindset when you get on the court, get on the field, and you're just gonna master what you master. And so that was kind of the approach. I'm gonna go all in, reckless abandonment. What am I gonna lose? Dad dealt with cancer. I'm just dealing with the what if factors. And so if I'm gonna go all in, that's gonna be my approach in business as well. I may not know everything, but if you look at all these teams have coaches, teams have the best stars in their position. What do you do with a team? You put it together. Same thing with the business. You put an all-star team together and go kick some butt. And that's kind of how I looked at it. I know my strength is knowing my weaknesses and being okay with it. My ego is checked enough from the military and the Marine Corps to know that, hey, I hate numbers, I hate math, I hate Excel spreadsheets. So find those guys and girls that know how to do that. Pull them in your company, let them handle accounting and billing and all that stuff. And then those are the girls that like to do operations. I hate it. So that's how we thrive, basically. Finding that, the Avengers team in your business team, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. I was going to go there and kind of beat me to the punch of what makes those individuals great, and what makes a lot of people great are being humbled and knowing where your weaknesses are, and either working on those and trying to make them better, or find people to fill those gaps, right? And so that's where, if we think about like what we do as advisors and acts of service to families and people that are in the industries that we serve of the high net worth, a lot of it is that gap fill, right? Is that
Yeah.
they, like to your point, want to live their lives and do the things that are important to them. If it's business, if it's family, whatnot, and they look to us as advisors and say, where can we fill those gaps? So let's talk about those gaps with you in particular. Let's look at like what is it that most people come to you and always request, regardless of if it's a corporate request, if it's an individual, if it's a sovereign country, whatever the thing, what is like that one or two things that is standard across that they are fearful of, that they come to you and ask you to help?
Well, somebody or something has put that executive assistant, chief of staff, family office, royal family in a panic mode. That chief of staff freaked out. Something happened, a threat, someone laid off, someone was terminated of their employment, or the kid did something stupid on social media. And oh my gosh, the world's going to end today if we don't get this figured out. And so it's all fear based. And they're responding to a stimulation in their head of fear. It could be factual fear, it could be real fear. And my job, what I've learned over the years is, okay, let's do like an investigation, case investigation, to figure out what is that family office dealing with, what's that royal family dealing with, or that corporate entity is dealing with. You talk to, if there's a corporation, chief security officer or director of security of that organization, or the family office, like in your world, Tommy, maybe executive assistant, chief of staff, more and less, maybe general counsel of the family. And we usually say, hey, we should do a risk assessment or threat assessment to find out what this is, what this looks like, and do a protective intelligence analysis, gather intel to find out, is this a real, is this factual, does this person exist? And with nowadays with AI and intelligence, you can get a lot of stuff in public platforms on other people. The stuff's everywhere. And then you have AI, which makes it even 10 times more powerful. And so now, we collect information and then we give it to the clients, whoever that might be, your point of contact, and say, here's what we see. Here's a threat assessment. Here's a risk assessment, what we did. And you give that information to that board of directors, that chief of staff, executive assistant, or the family office role, and say, here's what we got. And then what that does, it shows information and data, through data, to the decision makers. That could be the CFO, general counsel. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, here's the data. Let's do this and this. Let's deploy agents. Like, for example, First Public Bank, that went down pretty quickly. We got to call Brian Jang, worked with Mark Beason at Homeland Security. They spent a career together, and they had vendors that provided security support for them in the Bay Area. And they go, we got a problem with we're going to be melting down here soon. We need help. And so we deployed assets and resources under 8 hours nationwide to their markets. And he goes, whoa, that was fast. But we have a nationwide roster. Now we have a global roster. And the point is, always act out. People want actionable intelligence. That's the key word, actionable. They want intelligence that real and raw. And, we have relations with folks that have access to that intelligence. Some are overseas. Some are overseas based. I don't want to go into too much information with proprietary information on how we do our business, but protective intelligence is the key to building a security program for that family office, for the kids' trip to Mexico. Should we be going to Mexico? Maybe we should run intelligence with the State Department, OSAC, checking with them and see what's really going on in Mexico, Cancun, or is it heating up with the turf wars with the cartels? Hey, the kids want to go to San Diego, but they have to drive through LA. And is it right now this week a good time to drive through LA from Santa Barbara to do a vacation to San Diego? What the one-on-one look like? What's the fight look like? Oh, shoot, we have protests going on. We have
Mm-hmm.
Marines being sent in from 29 Palms. Maybe we should reroute this, or maybe just fly.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. I agreed. It's I think a lot of times that we look at our lives, we forget we're in a bubble. And sometimes we have to kind of look outside that bubble, and it takes sometimes an external force to sit here and bring that reality into our world and say, don't make this a trivial process. Make sure we're thinking through this, and thinking about security. And so you talked about like fear, right? Fear to me is a reaction. It elicits a reactionary response, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we flip the script and help people understand that the true value in the services that you perform, even though people look at the dollars and cents and say, how much does it cost to provide the security? But how do we flip the script to say the value really is being proactive and thinking
Being
about
proactive.
how do we incorporate small changes in our day-to-day lives so that we don't have these issues of fear. And to your point, AI, some of these AI bots and the things that they can produce
Mm-hmm.
look so real. And
They
to the
do.
people who are the
It's
most
crazy.
vulnerable, yeah, it's the people that are most vulnerable are the ones that just aren't educated. Not that it's a mean terminology, but just being aware of what's out there. So, how do we flip the script? How do we help people think about these types of manners in a more proactive, like less fear-based approach?
I think get around with folks, people like myself. I bring in the experts. I don't call myself
Hmm.
an expert. People do. I know a lot of people in the former Secret Service folks. I know people from the government agency folks that know things. And I think the key thing is education, educating that client, educating that chief of staff, executive assistant, general counsel, CFO, board of directors, educate them and say, hey, here's what we see. And once you educate them, and then they go, once you have knowledge, you have power. You can make a decision. And I think what's lacking right now is there's so much information going on right now. I was listening to Aaron Cohen on the news. He's a contributor on the news on different networks. He was Israeli commando over there, special forces, and the guy's brilliant. So shout out to Aaron Cohen. I don't know him personally, but what he says we're dealing with right now is a AI driven platform that's pushing all of this narrative stuff on all the social media stuff. And I'm like, it makes total sense. and it's causing distractions. But this is all AI driven. I'm trying to go off memory what I heard him say on the news, but I'm like, oh, okay, this is all foreignly invested by different AI platforms from foreign entities around the world trying to influence how we think on social media. I'm like, whoa, that just takes it to a different level. And I think we're a culture consumed by our phone because we do our life in our hand. We got that iPhone, we got that Samsung, and our life, we're on there 8 hours a day doing something, banking. That's our life. So whatever right here, we believe. And so we have to educate those decision makers, whether it be family offices, chief of staff, general counsel, the board, and say, hey, this is the protective intelligence we just sourced. We got the point of interest that you gave us, the possible threats for your family and your kids' vacation. Here's what we see. This is a problem spot. These are hot spots here and there. And this is how we have to get around it. And so education, simple.
How do you, so back to like the fearless mindset podcast that you have, like how do we change the mindset to where, because there's so much abundant information out there from multiple sources and the truth is all in between. You don't know what's truth, if it's 100% true story, if 80% is true, and the meat of the issue is 20% fabricated to make it sound like there's this issue happening. What have you seen in your practice of people who've been very successful of just kind of, I would say, like seeing through the noise into the signal, like trying to identify, like how do they should look at information, and just is it should be, obviously we shouldn't be biased and say, if it doesn't fit our narrative, I'm not going to listen to it. But how do we have this mindset shift of thinking about information, to your point, it's education, right? Because you could put a piece out and I could put a piece out about security. How should people think about it? Is it common sense? Is it something that's other people should be thinking about based on your experience?
I think it's ciphering what is white noise. You know, kind of decode it in your own brain and ask yourself, is this going to affect my current life? Is it going to affect my day the next 5 hours? Probably not. So should I let it consume my brain? Probably not. And I think that's the trick and the overwhelming consuming of social media in our psyche. Our psyche just we're so used to getting that dopamine hit, that dopamine drop, and that's just how we're conditioned. I mean, I'm guilty as charged too in the court of law of social media. I run a business, so I got two phones. I got this phone, and I have another phone, and it's constantly going off. And I think we got to get better at turning it off and knowing what's legit, what's not. And if it's coming from the networks, more than likely it's funds propaganda from one side or the left. And right now, we have a new administration in office. And this happens every 4 years. We have an election, then we have midterms. And so there's always some sort of spun narrative. And I think if it affects your job and your business, yeah, I'm in the security industry, so I watch it more than I should probably. That way I have an idea of how to gauge different deployments of assets to different areas of the country. I just pay attention to it because it affects my business. If it didn't, I'd probably be horseback riding somewhere on the ranch or doing cattle stuff, but because it affects my business, I'm more engaged. But I think people need to learn just to turn it off. If it doesn't affect your life, just turn off the news, take them off your platform, your apps off your phone, and I'd go to independent news sources. Like that's why. Uh, what are we doing right now? We're doing podcasting, right? To hear my personal story, and I think the general consumption right now is podcasting is more truthful than network news. That's why podcasting is exploding like it is. And that's why I started the podcast to talk to people like Tommy about, hey, what's a family office world like? And Tommy's asking me my thoughts. And then you're getting around the narrative, you're getting the facts. And that's what the consumers of podcasters want to know. They want to know facts. That's why everybody gets on Joe Rogan's podcast or whoever's podcast is on. You notice a trend. All those newscasters are now podcasters in the last probably 2 years. And what does that tell you? People just don't trust media, period. They don't. Especially the younger generation, they the ad spend on network news has dropped significantly based on what I've talked to my podcast producer. He said, "Yeah, network news, the ratings are dropping like a lead balloon because no one trusts them anymore."
Yeah, it's an interesting the legacy model. I kind of tell people about like growing up, right? It's going to date both of us. But growing up, we had that cycle, the cyclic, whatever, I can't say it, encyclopedia books, and the day they were printed or the day that they were obsolete, right? And
Hmm.
now with the introduction of the internet, right, it democratized the information. So now instead of information being available to people who pay for it, now it's everywhere, right? And so we
Hmm.
have this meta universe of just information floating around. And the beauty of it is because it's decentralized, anyone can contribute. The the problem with the process is because it's decentralized, everyone can contribute to it. So you don't know if it's good
Hmm.
information or bad information. But help us in the audience, because you do a lot around the physical security of a lot of high profile individuals or just individuals who want personal security and physical. How do you bridge from that threat that's AI driven and people saying, oh, it's probably some bot in a different country. I'm in this small little town in middle of North Dakota, for example. Like the threat isn't really real, is it? How do you help people take that AI or online meta threat to now translate that to a physical um, protocol, right? To help people secure their lives.
Pretty easy, yeah. You just run a protective intelligence research investigation with our partners and let them do some digging. It costs some money. It's not cheap, and they go on their back end, black web, dark web, wherever they go to hang out to get information, and they just collect that information and that point of contact, whoever made the threat, whoever that person is, and they'll scrub everything that's online. And then it'll come back, and then we'll probably get a confirmation of, is the person a bot or is the person real in South Dakota? Oh yeah, he's real. He works here at XYZ Trucking, and he has a house on XYZ Street in Dakota, and he's currently laid off, and he's laid off. Maybe he's got in the military at one point, big gun advocate. Maybe someone pissed him off, and they didn't do a fight online or something. We're here. But protective intelligence is so critical in getting your risk assessment and threat assessment done, and that will tell you. They'll guide the risk advisor, like someone like yourself, to the client. Say, hey, these are what we see. We see point A through Z. Here's what we should do. Here's the recommendations. It's up to the client if they want to pull the trigger. Maybe they want to deploy an agent, plainclothes agent in a POV, personal vehicle, on house estate or workplace of work, if it's a workplace violence situation, and have them do 24/7 surveillance in the car and have phone access to each other's contacts. If and when someone needs a text, say somebody is sitting out in a parking lot in a workplace and somebody sees the point of interest showing up and just got terminated a couple of days ago, that person would call the agent in the parking lot in the car and say, hey, I think the person just showed up. The agent would get out of the car and go in there and make contact with the point of interest and probably escort them off property. Same thing with the house. If someone drove up to a client's house or estate in Beverly Hills or Vegas, wherever it might be, and it's a stalker situation, and that person has a uh, um, restraining order on them from court, and they violate that restraining order, and boom, have a sheriff roll in, arrest made, put in custody, right eliminated.
Yeah. And so
So
what?
it's that
So
simple.
yeah. So what can we do like every day, like me and like just me by myself? Walking to the store through a parking lot, maybe going through a neighborhood that I'm not familiar with to get a shortcut. Like, what kind of things should I be vigilant about and thinking about, just as I walk through? Because I hear, and you tell me this is, if it's true, everyone, they interview a lot of, you know, bad guys and thieves. And they said, how do you
Hmm.
identify who your target is? And they said usually it's the most distracted person, right? To your point, that phone's in their face, they're looking down. Is it that simple of
It's that
just
bad.
look around, walk with a
Yeah.
purpose, make sure you know what you're doing? Like what is it?
Too much of this.
Mm, yeah.
I went to a concert in the park here in Grants Pass, Oregon. 80% of the people were doing this. That's just our culture. If you're in Chicago, going down the bad part of Chicago, walking around, if you're a female leaving the gym, I see the earbuds in and I see them doing this and or the headset on. I'm like, bad idea. Especially if you're
Hmm.
jogging, take the earbuds out of your ear, or at least take one earbud out of your ear. That way you can hear. But this is what's getting people killed. Believe it or not. Hard. I hate to say it, but the distraction is in your face. And if you're walking in, like you said, an unfamiliar area, most likely the times when executives get hit or high net worth people, they're being watched. Usually, if someone's going to hit them, for example, Brian Thompson, he got hit near the hotel. He's walking down the street, and that kid had been watching him for a while. Probably knew where he was going, and saw him in front of the hotel. Walked up, back of his head, and shot him. But he was hit from going from point A to point B. And usually, when you're most vulnerable, is leaving work, returning home, or leaving home, going to work. That's when people get hit. It's like the assassination attempts on, government people, politicians, whatever. They're actually moving, or they're out in public. And I'd say, yeah, get your face out of your phone, especially if you're in a new area or a bad area, and if you're a woman, younger woman. Yeah, the phone call can wait, texting can wait. Another problem is everybody's texting. So they think like it's urgent that they got to respond text right there. Wait, go to a public place, then return the text and get to a safe place. But I think it's just we create our own danger zone basically by our daily activity being in the phone.
It's interesting you made a comment about like the mundane activity of going to work and coming back. Is it that our brains are just comfortable that we're going through a routine that we're not draw pulls down?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
fascinating.
most travel teams, they will advise their principal, hey, let's take a different route. Let's not be predictable. Because someone's going to do a hit on somebody, they're going to study, they're usually doing surveillance. The enemies are doing surveillance on that target they have a target on that they want to take out. And they're going to sit there for, a few days, maybe a week. So they study the behavior of their target, of their victim. And so they'll study like, rapists, you hear stories on the History Channel, whatever channel that is, these guys, the stalkers, they study their victim like an animal predator before they do their hit. They know when they're going to drink water. They know they're going to lay down, and then they just strike. And these perpetrators, attackers, do the same thing psychologically. And so, yeah, you're basically a sitting duck if you don't have a protective detail, at least a secure driver, like an armed driver, driving you from point A to point B. And you should change your route, every other few days. And then look how the Secret Service does it. Secret Service has that president so locked down, and most companies they follow the Secret Service protocol and their executive protection business plan in building their security programs for different high net worth families like yourself.
Yeah, no, it's I would say that small things that I personally do is just yeah in the car the phone's obviously not in your hand, that's illegal, but pay attention to the cars around you. Not that I'm this high profile individual, but as you're driving to your house and you've noticed a car behind you,
Mm-hmm.
it could be just a common route that cuts through a lot of major intersections, and that's why the person's going on that road. But if it's someone that's been following you for a while and just pulls in a neighborhood behind you, and I always take a different route to my house or just drive by my house or go down a different cul-de-sac just to see what happens. See, and people ask me like, why do you do that? I'm like, just because I just you have this weird issue, weird,
Six cents.
sixth sense that something might happen, but usually it's nothing. But just being aware, or my kids are now getting to the age where they can start driving, and you're just pointing out like
Mm-hmm.
that person's going to cut me off here in a second. They say, "How do you know that?" It's because they aggressively pulled over past, next to me, and you can see where their tires are crossing the lane a little bit. Like they're going to try to cut, so you have to kind of be a little more thoughtful about how you perceive of the threats around you. And so, this
Situational
is,
awareness, you know,
yeah,
knowing
yeah,
your surroundings. And if you're up looking around and someone's watching you and I make eye contact with that predator that's looking at you to do a hit on you, if you make eye contact with them and you show some strength and you should like you're aware of what they're doing, or you get your phone and they at Sixth Sense take a picture of them, video them. They go, "What are you doing that for?" Oh, my cousins or somebody wanted a video of where I was at, so they knew where I was at in case something happened to me. But make contact with them, make eye contact with them, and then like you, something you said just clicked in my head, Tommy. When you say when you're have that sixth sense of someone's following you for whatever reason, I remember to make 3 left turns. And if someone's still on you after 3 or 4 left turns, you're being followed.
yeah. It's a
And fight, and
circle.
then
It's a circle. Yeah.
drive in a circle. Drive in a circle. And then if that person behind you, you know where the police department is, drive to the police station. Call
I,
911.
I,
I'm en
I
route to the police station.
yeah. It's funny. I always reference, the Hunt for Red October
Oh
when
yeah.
they're they do the crazy Ivan, I think they call it, where they just kind of go around.
Uh
The
huh.
guy's like, I never knew that was a protocol. I think he had said, I just made it up. Like, just if I'm gonna do a U-turn, we'll see if anyone behind me is gonna do U-turn as well. And just again,
Yep.
being unpredictable. And this is one thing I learned, um, that in some of the families I worked for, they had private drivers. And I would ask, like, we send you to driving school, like, what are they teaching you there? And I've traveled abroad and usually leave space between me and the car in front of me just in case someone pulls up, you can kind of go.
Right.
And he made this comment that kind of like, kind of got me thinking. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. He says, if you're in a traffic jam and someone comes up next to you, you want to lean up against the car in front of you and then gas it. Because if you gas it
Hmm.
into the car in front of you immediately, airbags will deploy. But if you're able to get behind them and push them out of the way, more likely you're not putting too much damage on the car, and so you can still take off. I'm like thinking, never thought about that, just nuanced of
Correct.
getting behind a car and then pushing him versus ramming him through. And so, I think those are the things that, again, we look at this world, and to your point, there are targets. People are targeted. That's usually some of the people that you're dealing with. But also, there's just you're in a bad place, wrong time,
Wrong
and
place,
something's going
wrong
to happen.
time,
And
and you're hit. And I think
yeah,
too, I think there's a lot. We had had an increase request for agents knowing how to chauffeur drive, which is smooth driving of an executive in your car. They don't want you jerking around because I think there's a misconception of defensive tactic driving, doing J hooks and all the fun stuff like you would race a car around. Well, an executive does not want to sit in the vehicle when you're doing a J hook. Sorry. You mean the Secret Service? When was the last time we saw a Secret Service agent in a car with the president doing a J hook? Never. And so I think there's a time and place for defensive tactic driving, but I think a lot of these families are looking for truly chauffeur driving, that principal that family from point A to point B in a smooth fashion safely. You don't have to be driving, aggressively and all that unless you're getting shot at. But we live in the United States of America. Unless you're going through downtown LA right now, yeah, you might get a rock thrown on your car if you're on the 101. I mean, that's just like knowing your surroundings and knowing your routes. And I think advanced planning is critical in the safety and protecting of these families that are traveling abroad. I mean, I think a lot of companies spend a lot of money just in their advanced teams, getting them from the airport, FBO, driver pickup, and taking them, escorting them, driving them to point A, the hotel. Then they go point A to point B to point C, and that's why you have advanced teams that advance all these routes. And that advanced team know where the hotels are. They know where the police department is. They know where the hospital trauma center is if there's a medical. Because 90% of the time, if anything's going to go down, it's not going to be a shooting. It's going to be a medical allergic reaction or a cut. And so that's no one really pulls their pistol out, but it's more medical demand than I think there is physical threat. But the advanced teams are so advanced work in the industry is so critical for your family offices, for your board of directors to get that executive from point A to point B. And that's where we really have seen the increase of calls for services is advanced work and driving details, crazy enough. And so now we have corporate accounts with all the rental car agencies. We have an agent show their driver's license. That agent picks up the vehicle, and that agent takes that vehicle to the FBO or the private aviation, Atlantic Airspace or Atlantic um, offices or wherever they have their private airports to pick up that principal from the private side, pick them up and take them to where they need to go. And I think as long as these executives and family offices know that their back is being watched, it makes them feel like they can get more stuff done since someone is watching their back. And it takes that edge off, I think, and it makes them more productive.
It makes perfect sense. So what are you seeing? You allude to more people having conversations and requesting smoother driving and some of those details. What trends are you seeing since you started, during COVID days 5 years ago until today? Is there this steady progression of the common things, or are there newer attacks kind of on the front that people should be aware of?
I think the criminals are getting smarter
Hmm.
and they're getting more deliberate and more aggressive. And I think the political season that we're just in, the elections, I think it heightened everybody, that polarized our country. And there's a lot of animosity, and I know social media feeds that. And so think about this: social media has changed the way we live our lives. You shop, Amazon, you do everything on social media, and because of that, it has made things a lot worse. And so you have, these high net worth families and their kids doing, are all over social media, Instagram, and they're posting where they're going. And I do know there's apps, there's social media protective intelligence things you can do against that. Those threats from this family and the kids vacationing. You can do geofencing. There's apps called geofencing that you can do, and I know there's software out there that you can remove people's identity. And there's several companies I'm connected with that's what they really do, is protecting the kids and protecting families and companies' brand and images online. Because if that goes in the wrong place, the wrong hands, that can be reputational damage, costing hundreds, maybe millions of dollars of stock value depreciation over one day, like United Healthcare shooting of Brian Thompson. Their stock took a major hit, and so now you have to look at brand reputation with a lot of these companies, protecting the C-suite and executives, and then you have the family office threat. The kids do something stupid, the teenagers do something stupid, and if you don't have protective intelligence in place to advise the security team on, hey, Susie Q posted something really stupid that they're in Cancun at XYZ hotel resort in Cancun, and they're getting stupid and they're doing shots, and now anybody that wants to kidnap them for ransom, boom, we know where they're at and we know where to get them. But I think there needs to be more done at a more protective level to protect the teenagers. I think truly as a teenagers, we're in a social media world, and these platforms pay them millions and millions of dollars to post something on there. It's crazy. And you have a 500,000 followers on Instagram or X or whatever it is. It's just that's the world they live in because they're influencers. And I think too, we have a new economy being created by AI. Think of all these billions of dollars being spent from overseas in the Middle East into AI in the US. They see it. And that's going to create a new economy, a new business, new threats, new risk.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
it's ever evolving.
Yeah, it's I would say, yeah, I agree. Like with I have young kids, and the influence of phones and the influence of sharing, and because that's kind of the norm these days, is to overshare. You and I, again,
Overshare.
dating ourselves, we didn't have phones, right? No, there was no
Nope.
phones. There are no cameras, good or bad. But to your point is that this, and I think this started obviously in the early days of the internet, but posting that you're getting a coffee right now or on a vacation is, delaying that and maybe not sharing it at all, but definitely not sharing it while you're there. And or here's
Wait.
another one I heard
Sure.
about. Think about the announcements that we have in newspapers, like engagements,
Hmm.
weddings, newborns, right? We're announcing that
Oh
to the
yeah.
world. And to your point, criminals are getting more sophisticated and saying, okay, you know, Mark's going to be at this wedding because his daughter's getting married or his son's getting married, whatever it is. And it's going to be at this church at this time. And we can do, like you said, a quick lookup of where Mark lives. And guess what? Mark's house is a target for the next 3 hours, right?
Yep. Do a
And
hit, get
so,
some jewelry while you're at it, and whatever's in the house, grab it, and yeah, then look at the trends on social media of what he's been buying. Well, the building project. Oh, there's some tools back there. He's doing some construction. Let's pick those too while we're at it. It's crazy. I mean, cameras only go so far, and I've seen a huge surge of companies buying this camera business model, and then the camera has all this tricky infrared thing and AI driven stuff, and then they'll call a call center in India, and then they'll call the police department. Well, that's gonna be a time delay of what, 5, 6, 7 minutes. A camera will never replace human interaction ever. I know, companies are trying to save costs. They don't see the value in these agents because they spend $50 an hour and they're all half sleeping on their phone in uniform. And so I think a lot of companies are going to AI driven cameras. And if you have a right security program in place, that could be effective. But then again, I'm hearing, yeah, that their dispatch center of the camera calls India or some foreign country. Then the foreign country call center calls the police department in that zip code to have someone dispatched. Well, that could be about a 10-minute delay. Well, it's over. Person got hurt. Someone's house is burning down. If you had someone on the ground, guess what? You would cut that down by 20 minutes. Different outcome.
so let's take a small case study of something you've worked on that you would say that is, I would say, applicable to a lot of varying people, regardless of wealth and status, of just something that you worked on that um, was an issue, a threat, a fear that created the situation, but also talk about what could have been done to prevent that issue or that case.
I think, yeah, it goes back to trying to jog my memory of a case study, but it all goes back to protective intelligence. Like Mike Trout said in his book, what a lot of companies do, they throw out a lot of bodies on a problem, like exec protection agents or bodyguards, to make the problem go away. But what they don't do is they don't do a really thorough job of protective intelligence, gathering information online, social media platforms to collect that information to make an intelligent, budget-driven decision. And we've been doing a lot of work with the company overseas, and they're really good at what they do for protective intelligence. And we had a client, uh, direct client of ours called Mark Beeson. This happened the last couple of days, in fact. And she goes, "Well, do you think we really need to deploy agents nationwide?" And Mark said, "Well, let's get this report from our partner to see what they say, and let's wait. His key words were, I don't want to waste your money on throwing money at something and hoping it goes away. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm trying to be conscious of your budget, and we don't want to waste your money. We're trying to protect your budget as well. Oh, thank you so much. Because if you want the respect of a client, you got to earn their trust. But the
Hmm.
minute you lose their trust, that business is gone. And I think too many times a lot of companies are trying to get billable hours to bill a client just for business. And they don't have the client's best financial interest in mind. But when Mark told that client that the other day, oh, thank you. Wow. He just earned more of her trust because he told her, hey, I'm thinking about your budget. You really don't need to spend money. It's not necessary. We did a protective intelligence report. There's nothing to worry about. I don't think you have anything to worry about. And most of the fears are fear driven. They see something on social media, on Facebook or Instagram, and they believe it to be true. It's going to affect them, but sometimes not.
Yeah. No, that's true, right? Because I think as advisors to families, right, we're there to give them relevant information so that they can be the most educated and make the most educated decision and move forward. And to your point, throwing more money at something doesn't equate to effectiveness, right? To your point. And so let's take the data that we trust and then let's move from there. And to your point about the money, ultimately, a lot of what you and I do, we have to somehow quantify it because the threat that you have, the threat that I'm facing with some of my clients, it's more to do with that subconscious issue, the
Hmm.
qualitative way of life, and to put a dollar amount to it is so hard. And so, to your point of trust is a big piece in all of our industries. And like for example, when I have clients that are looking for security, I'm coming to you and saying, Mark's team does X, Y, and Z
Hmm.
and I'm going to make the introduction. And it's up to now Mark to have a conversation with the client and say, here's the perceived risk. This is how we're going to approach it. And if the client's informed and they like the decision, they move on with Mark. But our jobs are to really just help people go through the life in the most advantageous, comfortable way without spending crazy dollars because the world out there, when we deal with high net worth individuals, is looking at their net worth first, and then they see how much they can
Hmm.
extract from those people with doing the least amount of possible work. And so that's good to hear people like yourself and myself that are doing it for the right reasons and not necessarily for the dollars. And we can have a balance. We can have a business model around that. But at some point, we have to put the client always first and put ourselves second. So it's good,
And I
definitely good
think
to hear
too,
about
with
that.
the economy being going through a tough time right now, we're coming out of whatever we were in through a presidential election. Is I see a sense of scarcity out there with a lot of businesses. They're trying to hit their numbers, they're trying to hit their quarter, and they're trying to get to the end of the game, the fourth quarter, and they're trying to make profitability. And you have to remember, if you're in business in security, your client has to be profitable. Otherwise, they're not going to spend money on you, and you have to show them a return on that investment, whether that's more quality time that principal has in the car, but you have to show some sort of value on that risk assessment, threat assessment to the CFO, to the general counsel, or the law firm, or the chief of staff. What value do you offer that principal or to that family? If they're just spending money on you, there's no value. You got to show proof. That's why the risk assessment and the threat assessments are so critical.
No, good point. And when I deal with clients and we kind of cover these items, it's you hit on it earlier with the reputational risk. So if you're going
Hmm.
through a deal diligence and there is something out there on you that the
Hmm.
buyer can say, "Hey, I can use this as leverage to ratchet down a multiple." If you take that multiple across your business, that could be a $10 million mistake
Easily.
because you didn't get in front of it and spend $10,000, let's say, on an assessment to get that behind you and say that actually is a nothing burger, right? And getting ahead of it. Because if
Right.
a buyer comes to you and says, "Hey, Mark, you had this issue 2 years ago," said that wasn't an issue. Here's what happened, and you're being
Right.
proactive. And to your point, that's where I look at value as thinking at how do we help clients that are doing deals and going through acquisitions or selling a business line, getting as much value from that transaction as possible, and looking at some of these, I would say, low hanging fruit. I really believe these are things that every person should do when you have a business, especially
Hmm.
if you're a solopreneur. That is all the business is on you, right?
Oh yeah.
The minute something
It's
happens to you,
hmm
the business is gone.
Yep. Right. Interesting you bring that up, Tommy. You just brought up a case study that actually happened. We had an entity in Nevada, a gaming entity. Won't go say who it was, but they're doing an acquisition of a reinvestment into a company entity in Mexico, and they wanted to know if there was any cartel connections, that type of thing, if it was bad business. And so we got hired to do a protective intelligence project on that. It went for a couple of weeks, and they wanted us to do their due diligence for them before they agreed to give them cash offer to do a buyout. That took that was several thousands of dollars, as you can imagine, but it came back as a negative. There was nothing connected. Everybody was clean, and maybe they're just good at doing washing their laundry. I don't know, laundering their money. Don't know, but that we were involved in that case study, and that was a due diligence. That was a business takeover, another company, foreign entity, and it was kind of cool to be used to do that due diligence and protective intelligence to find out if there's any known cartel connections within that business entity. And like, whoa, this is we're getting in this world more so. But I think as you see more private equity doing investments in other companies, you're going to see more of the protective intelligence side, research and developments type thing, but more just due diligence. If you got to do your due diligence because you just don't want to buy, a bad company because back it goes back to company valuation, stock value, especially if it's a publicly traded company. And you don't want to lose valuation if you all of a sudden it goes in the press that you're, getting in with the cartel and doing some bad business with some bad people, and then it can ruin your stock value. And then, heck, you don't want to go bankrupt because you should have done due diligence on that investment.
And
And I
I
think
look
we're
at
going to
too.
probably see an increase in private equity too. I think there'll be a lot of business acquisitions the next few years.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also that risk of, doing the pre-deal diligence is one thing, but also looking
Mm-hmm.
at, post-deal diligence of 1 or 2 years out. Like for example, when you have, let's say, a private equity come in, maybe they have a reputation to make changes in management. And so when you look at some of the changes in management that might affect long-term employees, there could be an issue there, right? And so thinking through the whole continuum of pre-deal, post-deal, and everything in between. And so Mark, so as we kind of wrap up a little bit,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, when should, and this is particularly for my audience more than anything else, when should a family just engage someone with you to just have a look under the hood, take a look at what's going on, just to help keep peace of mind and bring that fear level down. Like how should someone approach that as a family office?
I'd say anytime. Say someone's getting married, marriage with kids with a new family. What's the reputational risk there in that marriage? Is that other family they're getting married into, do they have issues? Um, Partnerships, family office partnering with another family office, acquisition again. Or just the family is in the LA market right now and they need help and they're in the LA market or they're in Chicago or they're in a state that's prominently going to have those issues of protest and rioting, maybe Seattle market, could be Portland market, or it could be a family getting ready for vacation. We're going in the summer and hey, we're going to do a trip to uh, the French Riviera area, and we just want to know: is it okay? Is there any threats? Is there a lot of burglaries going on? What's it look like? Just have a protective intelligence report done before they take off on a family trip. Because right now we're going summertime. You have vacations with kids. You want to go to the Caribbean, maybe South America or whatever. Take the private jet, and maybe you need to do a scrub on your employees. Maybe do a renewal for your HR department of backgrounds. Maybe it's time to clean house a little bit before the fourth quarter starts in. Maybe you need background checks on your staff internally. That's okay. You just got to do those things. You don't know. Sometimes people change over time, and it could be it could be vary for anything. But we can do all those things for family offices. Um, Preparing, for advanced teams. But I'd say your protective intelligence piece is what we can do. We can do the risk assessment. We can do the threat assessments, and just random scrubs, random family audits too. We can go in there and help that. We know the people in high places that can get those things done that are dangerous, and you got to protect your legacy as a family as well. And I think people forget that.
It's very very true. And I would say tough times for people will make them do interesting things. And so sometimes those um, long tenured employees might have a stress in their life that they're not willing to communicate to a family or a private ownership. But having that background saying, we know what's going on in your life, we can help just kind of be more proactive because most of the theft that I see in the family office space is that white collar crime. is just
The fraud,
you're not physically taking things, but you're just kind of
taking
manipulating some
advantage.
records here and there. And so and the challenging piece, and this is the part that um, I see in my space, and you probably do too, is that there's this implicit um, trust day one that and you're being given authority, and I say authority but in terms of like moving money and record keeping on a lot of zeros, and they trust you implicitly day one. And so it's one of those things where you're in there intimate. People always ask, like, what do you do? I'm like, well, I work in someone's personal life. That's the way I approach it. I'm in their personal life. I'm in their intimate conversations. I'm actually sometimes at a tennis match where I'm sitting at the
Right.
kitchen table and G1 is going after G2 and they're going back and forth. And you're just sitting there like, where's my popcorn? Because this is a different part of my life I've never thought I would see. But having those conversations and thinking about like making sure that trust is never broken, and saying, hey, let's do a background check on me. I'm your advisor. I'm here forever. I've been here for a long time, or I've been here for 2 days. Like, do a background check. Let's make sure we think through these. We do a lot of industrial psychology assessments
Uh-huh.
before hiring someone
Brilliant.
to almost unlock some of those
Yep.
um,
That's smart.
subconscious
Yep.
issues. And it's fascinating what comes out of those reports. And I never do one on myself because I'm afraid of what that could be. My wife might say, "I told you so."
Yeah.
But it's needed because you're dealing with people's intimate lives, and you're
You
you're
are.
you're dealing with their children, right? And if someone was working for me and had involvement with my children, absolutely, I want to make sure. And they could be grown
Yeah.
children, right? Because we're
Yeah.
advising grown adults on estate plans and money movement and investments. And so making sure that we're always looking at that.
You're dealing with
Um,
generational wealth right there.
yeah,
And
exactly. And that
then
legacy is a
the
big piece.
generational wealth has friends and they have friends. Are those friends good
Hmm.
friends or are they mooching, leeching off the foundation for their lifestyle? When I was in Orange County, California, working in executive protection, I saw that all day long. They call the
Yeah,
trusty babies. I'm like, I
yeah,
didn't know that was a thing.
yeah. Well, what's interesting though. Like a lot of part of my practice is the next gen education and helping
Yeah, right.
next gen understand that the money doesn't define who you are. It shouldn't be what makes your friends your friends. And there's this negative connotation of embarrassment that they have wealth and their friends don't. And it's like, how do we have this education to help them to understand that if that's the premise of your relationship with people in your lives, then it's going to be short lived and you're going to have a
Right.
lot of heartache, right? And so, how do we
Yeah.
change the narrative and say, let's have meaningful relationships? Let money be something that is part of the equation, but not the major part of the pie, and help them understand and educate them on identifying people that are there for the right reasons and people who are
Hmm.
there for the wrong reasons. And so, but yeah, no. Hey, Mark, it's been a great conversation. Before we go, any I would say tidbits, one or two things that if you have an elevator with someone that is going to ask like, hey, Mark, what do you do? Like, if you want to give them like one or two nuggets to say, this will get you on a course of just thinking about how you protect yourself physically. What would those two things be?
I would say just take an active approach of being aware of your surroundings. And that is your phone, less time on your phone and your face when you're traveling, and just when you're driving around, just be aware and just don't go monitor the news where you're going, and just kind of do a scrub. Driving into LA this week, put in the dates, activities in LA, and just do a scrub. And then as far as security goes, that's kind of what I advise. Just keep it simple. Doesn't have to be complicated. But you can do your own risk assessment on just Google or Chat GBT. That's a wonderful thing. It works. And just type in threats in LA or threats in New York, for anything going on this weekend. Chat GBT will spit something out. I guarantee it. And so don't be afraid to do that. As far as what I'm excited for, just inspiring veterans, giving them hope and purpose. And that's kind of our mission as a company, is to empower the veterans that serve our country, to give them hope, because they have a high suicide rate. And I know in one case that we had a guy that was contemplating suicide. We gave him a job, and He said he was going to take his life, and we called him and gave him work, and he's still around. I'm like, wow. And so I find purpose in that. And I believe we take care of our team members. And we do profit sharing as we grow. We spread the wealth with our family, with our team. We call the business is a family. That's kind of how I look at it. We're privately held. We're not owned by anybody. We're a veteran-owned company. And what I'm looking forward to is, growing the Fearless Mindset podcast and taking it to a media company in Texas. And so we're going to go more media, masterminds, networking, so people from all industries can showcase their personal journey. And so I know right now the way people get hired is changing as we speak. It's just people are finding people differently than they used to. And so how people found jobs in the past are not working anymore. Our podcast is what we're doing. So I'm going to be launching the Fearless Mindset Media here soon. And then, of course, running Ledlow Security Group as well. And we're just constantly expanding our operations nationwide and globally. But yeah, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Mark Ledlow. And you can find me on the Mark Ledlow on Instagram, and the Fearless Mindset podcast for all podcast platforms, and Mark Ledlow on YouTube. So that's kind of where you can find me. And Mark Ledlow Media, just type in my name, you'll see it. So all kinds of things going on. I got a great team behind me, and that's how I'm able to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I'll definitely put that in the description, all those different ways to
Yeah.
connect with you. Any things you want to highlight or spotlight? Any charities or not-for-profits? Did mention that, veterans is a big piece of what you do because you are one, but also I agree, there's a much needed it's frustration. I'm very frustrated in how we treat veterans, and that whole post service is just a mess, and hopefully we get that cleaned up. But
Yeah,
any
I'm
things
always,
that you're doing there?
I'm actually helping. If I find a veteran in need or someone served our country and they're having a tough time finding work, what I do is sometimes I have them on my podcast free of charge and tell their story. And I do that just to give back. And I'm also going to have the Wounded Warrior CEO. Their team reached out, and he'll be coming on the podcast. We just got to plan it and book it, but their team wants him to come on. So yeah, I always give back in those ways, just to tell their story and let them come on the show. And that's what podcasts are, telling your story. You don't have to you don't have to be a Joe Rogan, or you don't have to be a top 1% podcaster to tell your story. You just got to get over your own
And
fear of getting on the podcast.
I agree, Mirk. That is the biggest one, is your own personal fears of putting yourself out there. But the
It
beauty of
is.
these podcasts, you can say what you want, advertise what you want, and bring on people that are varying backgrounds, and the audience will figure out,
Hmm.
your contribution to the podcast world. But just getting information out there, sharing, and
Right.
again, helping people, live the best life. So, Mark, I want to just thank you for this time. I know you spent some time this morning with me, and I do cherish that. And if there's anything I can do to help you out, you definitely feel free to reach out. But, again, like I said, all your information is going to be in the description of this podcast. So again, appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day and a great summer.
Thanks for having me, Tommy. And I'll be looking you up in Chicago. I'll be out there in July for a conference, so hopefully you can get to grab dinner and hang out.
For sure. For sure. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.